Hey everybody, and welcome back to another F1 Roundup brought to you by Seedstream. We are coming out of 2024's F1 summer break, and that means that there's not been any action happening on track, but within the Seedstream app, it is full of stories that I think have some interest. We're going to talk about some of those today. Lando Norris and a potential championship challenge, and maybe his biggest problem is not actually Max. We'll talk about the development race as this season goes on and into next. We'll talk about potential controversy surrounding Red Bull Racing's car and why the rules have been changed and how those two could be linked, plus some interesting moves in the driver market. Now, these are all stories that have popped up inside the Seedstream app. Seedstream is an app that's totally free to go and download, something that some friends and I created. Many of you know this by now. I would just encourage you to go and have a look at it. Download it from wherever you get your apps from or via the link in the description. It has all of your F1 content. I'm going to leave it there for now, let you try it, but I'd love to know what you think. Let's talk then about Lando Norris. As we get back into racing at Zandvoort this weekend, Lando firmly believes he has a shot at the world title this year. Now, it may be a long shot. The points gap to Max is still significant, and Max still, make no bones about it, has a very, very quick car. I would expect him to do very, very well this weekend. Now, Lando has a very quick car too. At some circuits and on some weekends, the quickest. But to overhaul that points deficit, he needs to consistently not just beat Max, but take significant points away from Max. And I wonder if his biggest problem here could actually be the fact that Mercedes have also had something of a resurgence in recent races. The reason I say that is that not only do they provide a challenge for McLaren and for Lando, something they have to overcome over and above whatever Max and Red Bull can bring, but they also are there to potentially take points away, major points from the team in the Constructors' Championship, for example. I mean, of course, the flip side could be that they could also take away points from Max. So what could be something of a real challenge and something that could be a fly in the ointment of any potential championship fight for Lando could, of course, if it goes the other way, also help him. If the two Mercedes cars have a good weekend on a consistent basis, they could end up filling the gap potentially between Lando and McLaren and Max and Red Bull when they're not perfectly on song. That could help Lando, of course, and McLaren. But equally, if Mercedes, and as they've done this recently, are there winning Grand Prix, taking maximum points, that is the one thing that Lando needs more than anything else if he's got any hope of closing that gap. Mercedes could play a pivotal role in the outcome of this year's championship without anyone considering that to be the case, even them earlier this season. Keep an eye on it. I think actually that Lando is going to have a very quick car around Zandvoort, but I also think Max will too. With the home support, he will be giving it everything. But that car from Red Bull, we need to talk about it because there have been a bunch of rumours recently that have been growing in substantiation around what's happened to Max and to Red Bull. Their performance seems to have dropped off a little bit of a cliff, and with a caveat that they are still a very quick car and driver combination. But people have raised questions recently. Has the fact that Max has dropped away from being the dominant force simply come as a result of other teams taking giant leaps forward? And we know that McLaren have done that. We know that Mercedes have done that. And we know that on certain occasions, Ferrari are capable of doing that. So is it just that everyone else has outperformed or outdeveloped Red Bull? Or is there something that's happened to Red Bull that means they've suddenly gone backwards in their performance? Well, a few people have analysed this, and something that popped up in the Seedstream app recently this week, many people sent it to me as well, was a video that a YouTuber, somebody that I'd never actually heard of or seen before, had realised, and a lot of people had overlooked this or not noticed it, that a couple of weeks ago, when the FIA updated the sporting and technical regulations for Formula One, there's a little line in there that had some clarifications about the braking systems on a Formula One car. In a nutshell, it was saying that a new line had been inserted into the regulations, saying that effectively you need to have the same braking pressure when you exert pressure on the brake pedal, the same braking force or pressure needs to go to both sides of the car. Now, from front to rear, there's a huge difference. That's what we talk about when we talk about brake balance. How much of the brake bias, rather, is going to the front and how much to the rear. It's typically something along the lines of 60-something% towards the front, the rest to the rear. That's normal. So there's always a big split or a differential between front and rear. But side to side, it's not something that's ever really cropped up before on many people's radar. You can go back to the late 90s, and my old team McLaren came up with that third pedal. Remember what they called the fiddle brake on Mika Häkkinen's car, where going through a corner, he could apply pressure via a third pedal inside the footwell that would apply braking pressure to only the inside rear wheel to help to stop it locking and then help to get traction on the way out of those corners to prevent wheel spin. It's a very clever trick. Of course, it got outlawed back then. And some people now start to think, and it's looking more and more likely, that because this new line has been put into the regulations, there must be a very clear reason why the FIA have thought to do that now. It's very unusual for someone just to come up with an idea and say, well, look, there's a loophole here that maybe we've missed as a regulator. We should just close that down by putting a line in. What tends to happen is either you find that someone has exploited that loophole by finding what's happened to their car, you find a bit of technology on their car, or a team comes to you and says, look, we've had this idea, we just want to run it by you to see if we implement it, would it be legal, or is this a loophole that you want to shut down now before we even get into making it and spending the money? Either of those things could be true. So Red Bull or any other team could have said, we've had this idea about splitting brake pressure or offsetting brake pressure from side to side for the same reasons that we incorporated the fiddle brake at McLaren back in the late 90s. You could help get that drive out of corner. The unloaded wheel, which is the inside wheel through a corner, because it's unloaded, because all the weight is shifted to the outside, the inside wheel is much more likely to either to spin up when you start getting on the throttle pedal from the apex onwards out of a corner. That's the one that delays you, if you like, getting on the throttle pedal early. And if you can apply a small amount of retardation through extra pressure on that corner of the car as opposed to the other side, you can get on that brake on that throttle pedal earlier without the fear of it spinning up because it's being held back, of course, by that small amount of brake pressure. You can drive out the corner much faster. So either someone's come up with an idea and gone to the FIA and said, look, is this something that we could legally implement? And the FIA have said, look, no, thanks for bringing it to our attention. We'll clarify it in the rules and shut it down. That could have happened. Or someone has already been running it for a period of time. Now, the speculation, of course, is that there is one team that seems like it's had a major drop-off relative, of course, in performance in recent weeks, and that team is Red Bull. So the speculation, therefore, is could Red Bull have been running a system like this, where some kind of inertia valve, nothing driver operated, but an inertia valve, when you go through a corner and the inertia of the car swings one particular way, could it open a valve that's asymmetrical and applies asymmetric pressure to the rear brake circuit for all those very reasons I talked about? It's a theory at the moment, and a theory that a lot of people are thinking, well, it makes a lot of sense given that you can tie in the lack of performance in recent weeks, plus this new update to the regulations where this loophole appears to have been closed off by the FIA. Is it because they found Red Bull or anybody else running such a system and have now decided that they need to stop it? Those are all things that I've been reading about and seeing videos on, and the more and more I read about them, the more and more sense they seem to make. Right, that's one to keep an eye on in terms of Red Bull's performance. Even if you take away any of these things, they still have a very quick car, which is going to be in the mix, which keeps the battle at the front, very interesting and exciting moving forward. And in terms of that battle, from the front of the field all the way to the back, it is going to be centered around development. I heard recently Dave Robson at Williams talking about how the development race in 2024 is so crucial. We know that. It's a development race at the end of a stable set of regulations where the gains that are at the front, the people at the front of the field, have got very limited amount, that sort of law of diminishing returns at the end of a stable cycle of regs. Whereas those teams that have never quite managed to maximize those regs have that opportunity to close that gap without the leaders continually just running off into the distance. We should get great racing out of that as the field closes up. We're already seeing it, but it means the development battle is more and more important. And one of the reasons it's important is because anything that's learned in 2024, of course, carries over into 2025 because the cars effectively stay the same. But the other side of this is everybody wants to front load their development now because in 2025, you've got 2026 looming, the biggest regulation change in Formula One history. Chassis reg changes, engine reg changes is a monumental opportunity for those people who get that right. And to get that right, you want to be starting on it as early as possible, putting your time, your energy, your resource into 2026 and not spending 2025 developing the 2025 car. So what I mean by that is we're going to see more and more development now in 2024 and for the remainder of this season and into the winter. Then in 2025, I imagine a lot of that development will stop. What we should have is a very close field because the field will have closed as a result of all of those changes. But we're not likely to see the big updates on the 25 cars coming next year because all of that work will be happening behind the scenes ahead of getting ready for this massive shift in 2026. So all of that is very interesting. I think we're going to get a very exciting end of 2024, and it should just seamlessly carry on into 2025 with all of this really interesting stuff happening in the background that we won't really see the results of for another year later. Fascinating times in Formula One. And the last thing that I thought was fascinating was Valtteri Bottas' Instagram post this week. To me, it seems like an absolute no-brainer that when he posts a picture of himself sitting next to an Audi R8 with his own branding on the back, that is the clearest signal possible without actually getting a statement from the team that Valtteri is going to be staying at Sauber, transitioning into Audi throughout 2025 and into 26. Why on earth would you post such a thing if that wasn't the case? And if he's posted that post, which he has from California just last week, then why haven't the team followed up with a statement? Why haven't they clarified this? Maybe they like the speculation around it. Maybe they like the story building before they finally deliver the news and confirm what we think we all know. But really interesting little post from Valtteri. And by the way, if you haven't yet heard my podcast with Valtteri Bottas, which dropped last week just before he did that post, it's fascinating. You will hear Valtteri in a light that you have never heard him before, talking about subjects you will have never heard him talk about before, dropping bombshells that even made my eyes open. He was one of the nicest guys that I've ever had the pleasure to talk to in some depth, and it was in depth. So I highly recommend you go check it out. I'll link it in the description, but you can go and search the Pitlane Life Lessons podcast wherever you get those from. That is it for this week. Please go and check out the Seedstream app. I highly recommend it. I don't think you'll be disappointed. I genuinely think you will love it. If you're a Formula One fan like I am, I use this app every single day. It's where I get all of my content from because it's so seamlessly easy to use. Breaking news, videos, written articles, all with a really interesting and useful short summary that condenses the article into a very short piece if you haven't got time to read the whole thing. One of my most interesting features that I use a lot, but everything's in there that you'll need as an F1 fan. It's totally free to download, and I would love to know, let me know in the comments, anything that you think about your feedback on this video, but also about the Seedstream app. Go check it out, tell your friends about it, and I'll see you next week for another one. Ta-ra.